My name is Steffi and I chat to video game developers. On this episode, I speak with Pat, creator and game developer of the Masters Pupil. This is part 2 of a 2-part interview. In part 2, we discuss the beauty of how indie games can now compete with AAA titles. We discuss how much the indie game industry has changed and evolved in the 7 years it took Pat to finish the Master's Pupil, and how he believes the Master's Pupil might not have been as successful as it is now if he finished sooner. We discuss how creating a video game is the easiest it has ever been. We also discuss the importance of marketing your video game as a game developer and much, much more. Links to the gameplay of the demo and the game are in the bio below, and link to part 1 of the interview is also available in the bio below. I did have some technical and internet issues while recording this interview. There is a tiny bit of lag between Pat and myself. It's not too painful. Despite this, I really do hope you enjoy the interview. Don't forget to beam me up, crew. Support this channel by hitting the subscribe button. Can I ask, and this is, sorry, forgive my ignorance, I can't believe I am asking this, the style of his art, is that the same style of your art?
No. I had to, so again, impressionism is that kind of splashy paint, like visual paint strokes and kind of separated colors. And no, not really at all. Like my painting, I hadn't really painted since the end of uni, and once I got into film and animation and stuff like that, I was fiddling with that in that world, and I'd stopped kind of painting altogether. And to be honest, I majored in painting because I didn't really have any other options. We only had like painting, drawing, and sculpture or something, and maybe a couple others. But painting was like I could do 2D artworks on a wall, and that's kind of what I wanted to be doing. I did end up using a lot of paint, but it was a kind of very splashy and very separate. My major works were kind of completely different. But then I didn't really take up much painting after that. And so then when I wanted to do this, I had to then try and mimic one of the best painters of all time. And so it's just this kind of like, how do I do this? Like this is difficult. Like and then, you think it's hard, and then you get into it and you study what he's actually doing, and you're like, it's even harder than I could think of. Like, I think impressionism is one of those things that people do when they're learning, because you don't have to polish something off. But he was so obsessive with color. He was so obsessive with just like, these tiny little, like, he would do something and then just add a tiny little flick of like a little dash over here and a little dash there. And suddenly these objects would have a lot of depth, or like a sunset would look right, or clouds would look right. And I'm like, I couldn't do that. So what I tried to do instead was just mimic the overall style, and then let his artwork do the talking. And so his artwork comes into play. There's this like mechanism where you kind of run into, the camera kind of pulls back, and the layers of the game kind of pull together and line up to form his artworks. And so I wanted those to do the speaking, do that kind of like moment of awe, have those as like rewards between puzzles. And then have my artwork as the glue between those, the art that holds the big art together, and that I could do because that was a different form. That was like recreating his style or his techniques rather than trying to recreate masterful artworks like his, or masterful landscapes like his.
No, I think your style in the game is beautiful as well. So you have a lot to be proud of. That reminds me that the main character, tell me about the little chalky white guy.
Yeah,
What
it's a
is
weird
it?
thing because what is it? I originally, like I was telling those like layered ideas, right? Like I had a concept early on that like everything in the eye would be a halfway in between the real world. So like, science, the way the actual eye works, the origins of all those like smoke draft things were actually because it's all liquid inside your eye. So I thought, well, there can be like stuff that's like flowing, and like we can have this kind of flowing, movement through the game and whatnot. and then, the way the line of where your eye is kind of conceptually, at least as a thought experiment, was like, well, that's halfway in between the real world and your imagination. That is like where you start to perceive things and where you can kind of conceive of things. And so I wanted these kind of like elements inside the eye to be a little bit like weird and surreal and have this sense of, imagination. They were coming from his thoughts and where his kind of like ideas were. Um, and so the character, like, you know, in my mind, she doesn't have a gender. Like, it's not really, it doesn't have a
Mm.
gender it's not really a human. But I always envisioned her as a her, because maybe that's a little dress, not sure.
The
And,
dress, yes.
like a little triangle shape that could be a dress, I guess. And that originally I was going to call the game Iris, and that she was called Iris, and that, the game is Iris and it's set in an iris. Like,
Yeah.
just as a nice, looping connection. But then when I could really boil it down to having literally no text, then I thought, well, that character can just be anything. And I think,
Yeah,
if
I love
anything,
that.
I call, Iris is like a sprite. It's like a wood nymph, that runs around in the forest. It's like that lives in your eyeball and, like, I don't know, gives you inspo and helps you and whatever. Like, it was that kind of idea. But like a lot of things, as I've described, is like so much of the choices of the game were boiled down to be um, part of the way the mechanics worked, part of the flow of the way the game works for the player. And so, the reason she's white at the start is because canvases are white when
Hmm.
you start painting, and so you can add colors to them as you go. And you know, when you mix too many colors together, she goes this dark, muddy black color, and that kills you. And that was really only justified because, again, the way the mechanics stack up and mixing colors, and
Mm.
that Monet never used actual black paint. He always mixed other colors to get close to black. And so
Wow.
apparently the story goes that on his
Why?
funeral,
Yeah.
well, he was obsessed with color and he was about mixing color. And
Mm.
as a painter, if you use black paint, a little goes a really, really long way and it can mess with stuff. It just bleeds into everything and can kind of make stuff a bit disgusting. And so I think he just avoided it, and he was kind of almost known for it at a certain point. And that if you want a really dark
Hmm.
color, true black, jet black in nature is rare, and so he was painting a lot of like nature scenes, and so he would in the day, and so he would really actually come across black. And so when he wanted really dark colors, he would just mix these perfect like browns and you know dark umbers and stuff that were just like you know ridiculously beautiful. And so the story goes that on his funeral he had a black shroud over his uh, coffin, and that his friend came over and whipped it off and was like, "No black for Monet."
Mm.
So I don't know how real that is,
Nice.
but it's repeated several times on the internet.
Yeah.
So
It's very romantic, at least, if it is a true
yes, right.
story. So,
And because he was
yeah,
so like
yeah.
the whole purple story, he's so obsessed with color, and you're like, okay,
Mm.
sure,
So crazy. And yeah, just the way that you describe his work in the sense of as you throughout the game when you are playing, and if you I encourage all players to just take the time to actually view the art when they get to each level, like something as simple as the sky or something as simple as the ocean. The ocean has like 20 different colors. It's not blue, it's
yeah,
purple, it's like
yeah.
green,
And
it's
there's
shades of
there's
blue.
one
It's
of them.
insane.
There's one of them in that even now, like I'd be test playing something and I'd stumble across it and I was like, oh damn, that one's amazing. Is because it's in the
Mm.
yellow sun level 5. There's this
Hmm.
there's a ocean scene that is quite clear ocean, and then he's like painted, I think this like he's got a blue ocean, but then he's painted a reflection of the blue sky on top of it in like a different blue. And every time I see it, I'm like, what? How do you do that? Like, I don't understand. Like,
Mm.
I think there's like that kind
Yeah.
of painting is just phenomenal because he's not aiming for like, if you see someone really render something realistic in oil paints, it's like phenomenally interesting. But then he just like goes the other way and still is really, really realistic in all these different ways. And it's just, I don't know, it's just stunning.
It's amazing. So it's obvious why you've chosen Claude Monet. I guess if you could choose any other artists to create an entire video game, which artist would you choose?
Because I've been asked this a bunch, especially by people online, like, "Oh, are you going to do a sequel? Like, are you going to do the Masters of Pupil too?" And I was like, I can't do that to my hands. I don't know if my wrists could take it. Like another 7 years of painting. I don't know if I could do that. But it's just brutal. Like, yeah, the RSI is just not going to do it. But I've joked a lot that I could do. So this one's Claude Monet's eyeball. I could do Van Gogh's ear because he cut off his ear like later
Oh,
in his
that's so
life,
smart. Yep.
right?
Hmm.
And then
Yeah.
Frida Kahlo's eyebrows, her monobrows, because she had that great monobrow that she had her whole life. She was like a feminist icon. I was like, that would be fantastic. And I mean, like, I loved the surreal parts of the Master's Pupil. I love doing those kind of strange little creatures and stuff. And so I could really lean into that with like Salvador Dali's curly mustache, and have it set on his actual mustache. So I was like,
Oh my
but
God, that would be amazing. You've got to do it. I'm
like
gonna I'm gonna start
dripping
the trend.
clocks and
We're gonna
the,
oh
I was
the
very, very close at
elephants
one
and
point.
just oh,
Yeah, like skinny legged elephants and those like, something jumping out of like tigers' mouths and stuff. I don't know. Maybe one day, but on the 10th year anniversary, I'll do like a couple of levels from different artworks.
what does it mean by painting an entire video game? Like, what does that mean? How did you do
What
that?
is the process? Yeah, I think it's a tricky
Yes.
one because it's like a lot of people ask me like, oh, but and then how do you get the paint into the game? And I was like, the same way you get any like any object, like any document into a computer, you scan it. You get a flatbed scanner and you put it
Yeah.
in there and you
Okay.
go. So that's the first process. But it was actually a whittling down of all these kind of like processes that I did. And basically, because I did try to take a photo of it, I tried to scan it with a regular scanner. And eventually I
Hmm.
bought a really high res scanner that is, it's designed to do like, like film negative scans. So like you take a photo in like actual film, you get a thing and then you can scan that in. So it does like, it's essentially blowing up a postage stamp to the size of a building. Like it's a massive like scale up. And so I got one of those. I put the money in, got that. And then I went through this kind of like trial and error process of what I would actually do at the end, like the what I resolved, what I got down to was basically I'd make the game in Unity, all the levels, and all these like pieces of like, shapes essentially. So the ball could roll exactly right. I could tweak it and get it exactly right. Then I took a screenshot of those. I put them out on an A4 page in Photoshop and I printed that out really like low opacity. So it was really, really light on the screen, on the paper. And then I'd paint over the top of those so they would be like exactly the right shape. And then I would scan those back in, cut out all the images again. Sometimes I'd have to tweak them if I changed something or whatnot later on, but then they would eventually be the last artworks. And then for the backgrounds, like I have these like artworks that are like, only a few centimeters tall, like 10, 15 centimeters tall, and then like a meter wide because they're the background paintings that are like the very background images, landscapes that you see in the game. And then there's these other kind of layers in the game, and those I kind of made out of like these little repeatable kind of curves and shapes with like frayed edges almost, so they can overlap. And so they kind of became the building blocks of the like the background kind of filler landscapes. And so it took me a long time to get to that, and you can see early on like I don't have those frayed edges, and so there's these repeated shapes in the background. But then I kind of got more and more complex as I built the game because I was building this very slowly and very like in my hobby spare time. And so I often didn't want to repeat things, but I also wanted to just make one step at a time as best as I could and then get to the next bit and learn from what I did in the last one and repeat something and do that continuously. Um, so yeah, it's a very long process, but essentially everything in the game is actively hand painted on paper and then scanned in and put into the game.
So, why did you decide to make a video game?
I think it comes back to what I was saying earlier on about where I was and what I was making and what I wanted to do. Because I had come from this very creative space where I was like doing creative arts and I was painting and having a ball. And then I went to film school because I wanted to chase down a complex art form, something that had a lot of layers, a lot of disciplines involved, something that kind of takes a lot to kind of complete it. You know, as a kid, I was always obsessed with like Leonardo da Vinci. He was like they call them polymaths,
Mm.
but I don't think it's about math. You know, it's like it's about people that can do a lot of different things, right? That was like my inspo when I was like, I don't know, 7 or 8. I was like, oh, he's an inventor and a painter. And so I kind of was chasing down like multidisciplined artworks, right? Or art forms. So I went into film, and I was doing a lot of film, but then I couldn't do that by myself. I had to compromise with, not necessarily compromise, but I had to work with a lot of people and their schedules. And you can't really, especially early on, you can't make film all the time. Like that's not, you can't do that every day. You can't make your art every day. You have to like gear up and then every 6 months make a short film on a weekend. And then if the weekend is raining or an actor is sick, you're screwed. You know, like you can't, you can't, that artwork is then changed completely, right? And I was never a good, like I like improvising and I like sketching stuff quickly and stuff like that. But I was never really good. Like I always go back in and repolish things and touch things up and redo things and stuff. So film always felt very kind of permanent in that way. You can fix it in edit and you can add things, but at the end of the day, it is what you is when you film it. And then, like I said, this indie apocalypse happened. These people were making interesting, unusual games that were smaller, that were small scale, but still sat alongside, you know, and it's the beauty of games in the game industry. Small games sit alongside big games. Small movies don't sit along big movies. You can't go see a short film at the cinema. But in my Steam library, The Master's Pupil sits next to, I don't know, some other game starting with TH. Like it's like it can sit next to like a triple A game, right? So it's like they can sit there together. They can be in that same world, and you can already the mechanism there is there for how they, you know, if you just pay less money and you get a smaller game, like it's just that simple. And so it's a great kind of um, art form to make because that's what I wanted to be doing. I wanted to be making art. I fell into graphic design because it was easy. I liked it. It was, I could do it freelance. I could like work my own hours and like make logos and make varied kind of interesting things. But what I realized was like I wanted to be making my own art. It wasn't enough just to be creative and make things. I wanted to be kind of making. I wanted to be my own client. I wanted to pick the logo. I wanted to, you know, do that kind of thing. And so it kind of came out of a lot of things. It became this ladder I could climb, or I could maybe I make this small game, and maybe that would make it a bigger game. And once I started really getting into it, I had spent about 3 years making the hobby, making the demo, and making the hobby, making my hobby more of my life. Um, and I made this demo, and I really liked it. My friends and family really liked it, and that's when I decided to go part time and start working less and less hours to like make it part of my career, you know, because it was just like it's what I wanted to be spending my time on was making art, and games just were the way that I could do that. You know, it was a interesting art form. It was a viable method of making it, and yeah, like I said at the start, at the end of the day, you just get to play it, and that's awesome. Like that's the coolest thing.
I totally get that. And so much respect for, taking a chance on yourself. It's not easy. And we also spoke offline about the amount of success this game has had. Now, it is obvious to me why the game is so successful. And, this conversation, a lot of our topics have been centered around why the game is so successful. But in your opinion, why do you think gamers love the game?
I don't know. I wish I had a good answer for this because
Yeah.
then you could, you know. I think there's a so like we had discussed, this game it had three
Mm,
different posts that went like uber viral, that went over 1 million views.
mm,
The last of which got over 8 million views, and this was both on Instagram and TikTok. And uh, they were about me painting the game and about how long it took. And there's I found some footage of me when I just started it, and I don't have a beard, I don't have long hair, and I am looking fresh faced and like 20 something, like I'm young. And I'm still young now, but I have a beard and I have long hair and I am grizzled. And so I made sure that my beard was grown out a bit, and I did this shot of me, like I matched the shots. And that was one of the first ones that went super viral. And I think and there's been a lot of people as well. I think it's a timing thing as well, because it's far away from those original indie 2D puzzle games. Because after those games came out, there was a whole lot of copycats. There was a lot of that kind of thing. And to be honest, the the gaming industry is saturated with those kind of games.
mm,
And I think because it took me so long to make it, I was out of that saturation. So I'm into an area where it's like there's still a lot of people making 2D puzzle games, but I think if you're getting right into it, you would avoid that kind of genre. But so now here comes this other game that's in that genre, but it is very different looking. It's pushing that kind of artistic boundaries of what games can do, what there is, because I don't think this game could have. It may have worked, but I don't think technically it could have really worked maybe 5 or 6 years ago for a lot of
mm.
reasons. But I think mainly it's a 9 GB game. It's like to download that 6 7 years ago would have taken forever. Like it's like it's a big for an indie game. It's very like technical and heavy on the computer, so it can play on a lot of things. But that's down to like the smart people at Noble Games that like Noble Steed Games that published it, that like the original game was 50 gigabytes, and they were like, you can't have it that big, dude. You have to reduce those images down.
I think that's very humbling of you to acknowledge, I guess, the time frame and timing, and I guess potentially
Yes. Oh, yes.
contribute the
Because
success of that.
yeah, because the success really comes down to a lot of that, and I do think like that was one of the reasons I did hand paint it, was because it's very unusual, and I think seeing something unusual like that, and since that this year alone, there's been two or three painted games that have come out, not in the same style. Like there was a watercolor one. There's someone doing a game at the moment that is entirely embroidered, so it's like the actual
Oh
animations are like
wow.
stitches. It's stunning. Um,
Yeah.
and so there's a lot of people doing different things, but I think, yeah, it was I was just before that wave or just on that wave, so that helped. And then, I had the time and the willingness to actually really work hard on the social media, which is, for any devs
Mm,
listening, it is the final stage of your of the process of making a game is marketing. And without properly putting enough into it, you're not going to get enough out of the
mm,
game at the end, because, you know, making a whole game by yourself is really difficult. Painting a whole game is really difficult, but marketing is like one of the hardest things I've ever done. It's just a strange magic that you have to just learn and make do. And so that I think was a process of just like putting a lot into that, because that was like 3 months, like nearly full time of just like
mm.
working out how to do it and like recording things and like constantly putting stuff out and being a content creator for like, 2 months or something. So yeah, it was a long process. And I think it just stacks up. Every time you get a little bit, that pushes a little bit more. And then by the time I hit these 3 viral posts, I was kind of shocked. I didn't think it was ever going to get to that stage. So I knew I had something interesting. I knew that I really liked it and that gamers like me could play it and really enjoy it and would want to play it. But I didn't expect that kind of attention at all, really.
I completely get that. You deserve it. And just touching on the marketing side, I love it. I'm seeing this big wave of game dev vlogs. I think
Yes.
it's so amazing. Purely for the fact that I feel a part of the experience. So they've
Yeah,
started the game, they're creating the game, we have input in the game, and then when the game comes out, I'm like, I've been a part of this journey. It's so beautiful. So I encourage
yes,
every game developer, market yourself, build a community. It's
yes, do
amazing.
it. And it can only help your game,
Absolutely.
you know. And I think especially because like you mentioned that you've only started games pretty recently, but I think for a lot of
Yeah.
people that have played games their whole life, and I've heard this from a lot of developers that like never thought about games being something that they can do. You just played a game and it was like it seemed like a witchcraft that someone else made, aliens made. Like it's not even like humans were doing it, right? And then at some point you kind of they came around the idea that like, oh, this is a tangible thing that I might actually be able to be involved in. Um, but I
Mm.
think now, I hope at least that like, you know, well, hopefully Gen Zers, but everyone underneath them are like learning and seeing that there's the games are really tangible, and they're seeing it because like doofuses like me are just constantly posting stuff online. They're like, "Ooh, look what I did! Ooh, look what I did!" Like it's being part of the process, right? So I think it's very helpful, having that kind of tangible reality of what games are and what goes into them, because there's such a toxic kind of environment around games, um,
Mm.
that and around developers, like especially like namely AAA spaces, like if
Yeah.
something goes wrong, they'll be like diehard fans will be like, oh, the developers are lazy and they don't like us, they don't like games, developers are out to get us, and it's like, well, no, they're part of this massive machine. They're individuals like chipping away at these kind of giant things. Um, that it's just it's good being able to be involved with what's happening. I think for sure.
I think there's a tremendous amount of money, or I don't think, I know there's a tremendous amount of money in the gaming industry. And so anywhere where there's so much money, there's so much pressure. So I can't even imagine how much pressure the
Yeah,
big developers feel,
yeah,
and just fans just coming at them because they would
just
be
going
hating themselves.
mental.
The internet needs to
Yeah,
be a tiny bit more kind. But
yeah.
anyway,
My favorite stat is
it's
that
absolutely
the games industry makes more than the music industry and the movies industry combined
yeah,
per
insane.
year. You're like,
Insane. Insane.
how? It's a phenomenal
Yeah.
industry, and those big things are like 800 people for 4 years making like this one experience, And I think that's the problem too. Is like we talked about expectations earlier on. One of those expectations is that
Mm.
people see stuff early on because they want to start driving marketing early on. That they put out all this stuff. People get an expectation of what that game is going to be about, and then when they play it, it doesn't meet those expectations because they start the seeds of those expectations started like 3 4 years ago, and now they're like, well, it doesn't do what I thought it would did. So yeah, it's a whole
Mm.
different world.
Insane. A whole nother conversation we can get into another day.
Yes.
You've taken 7 years to complete this game. Did you ever anticipate it taking this long? Was that your time frame?
No, never, never. I was never like every year. I was like, people would ask me, like, especially when I started telling people about it. Within the first year or two, and I was like, I think, making this game, I really like it. And I'd be chatting to all my friends about different areas of it. And every time someone would ask me, oh, so when do you think it's going to be released? I'd be like, oh, the end of next year, probably. Like it, my idea of
Seven
the
years later.
scale, yes, right, like every single year, and even towards the end, I'd be like, oh yeah, the end of next year for sure, like that's when it will get done. And like, I even told Screen Australia, like applied for this grant, and I said to them, oh, end of next year, and then 6 months after that, like they were cool with it, they expected it, like first time devs, they're not gonna hit the nail on the head, like timing is hard for full size teams, those AAA games that we talked about, they can be 6 months, a year out of whack, right? So yeah, I never anticipated to be 7 years.
I'm happy you kept going with it. Were there moments you were going to give up, or were you like stuck on completing this?
Oh, that is a good one because I think at some point you get a bit of a like a sunk cost fallacy where you're like, in for a penny, in for a pound. Like I've gone this far. I have to kind
Mm.
of see it out. But that's not to say that I was like, what am I doing? So it wasn't necessarily like, oh, should I give up? It was like, what have I spent all this time on? Like this is such a long process. I'm not going to get any money out of this. Because, I'm 34 now. And so
Mm.
all of my friends in my early 30s were like stepping up in their jobs and like earning like real money. And I was still like, not all of my friends, that's harsh, but like the ones that talked about money, right? Like suddenly we're all kind of like, oh yeah, everyone's like moving up in their careers, and I'm like taking a step back. I'm like earning less money. Like I'm gonna work less hours and do this other thing that's completely for free. And so, and because it was taking so long, those years like started stacking up and more, and you're kind of getting this point where you're like, is this what am I doing? Is this the right thing to be doing? But I think for me, it always came down to like I wanted to be doing a creative pursuit, and I wasn't earning the money. But in the end of the day, money's not what it's all about. You want to be spending your time in an interesting way. Like that's all you've got, right? So it's like I don't want to be doing as many logos. I want to be making a video game.
Mm.
So that's what I'm going to do, and that's what I'm going to try and do. And then at the end, it was like, well, the marketing was the hardest bit because it wasn't what I wanted to be doing. It was the hard part. It wasn't my skill set. And that's when I was kind of like, well, now I've got to do a good job here because I've got to make up for 7 years of this process.
I completely respect that. I guess, do you have any advice you can give any inspiring game devs or people thinking about starting their first game?
The two things that I like to say, one comes back to what I was just saying, which is like
Mm.
it's work. It takes the work. It takes a lot of time. You need to be able to enjoy the work. And that flows into, enjoy the work because you're not going to be able to really enjoy the game. If you're going through the process of game development for the end product, you're never going to be able to play that game the same way as players will because you know every trick, you know what is behind every fake wall, you know every beat that game is doing. You know it like the back of your own eyelids, like it is like literally burnt into your brain. So you can never play that game how anyone else is going to play it. So don't make the game for the like my next game. I'm making that game because it doesn't exist at the moment. There's not something that I want to play this. I want to have that experience that I don't have. So I'm like, well, I need to make that because then it won't exist. But I know that I can't play it like someone else. I just think it's a cool thing
Mm.
that doesn't exist yet. So I'm like, well, that would be interesting to make. And it's a process that I like. It's a puzzle in itself. Now that I've learned game development, I was like, well, that's another challenge I can do. This kind of open world experience, non-linear story. How can I make that into a story world and, get this idea of a mechanic and get this idea of a story and kind of blend them together. Um, that's an interesting process that I want to go through. I think the game would be
Hmm.
cool to play. That's why I want to make it, but it's not something that I'm like, well, then I can play it and I'm going to have a great time. Like, it's not really the process, right? You don't, yeah, it's a difficult one. It's really difficult, especially because it just takes so long. Like, it's a very long process. Everyone that's opening up Unity now and learning how to game dev, it's a long time. So just enjoy it.
I respect that, and not only is it time consuming, you can argue it's thankless. There's often very little end reward, like monetary value, at the end of creating a
Hmm.
indie game.
Hmm.
And I guess you've just got to have the joy of gamers enjoying play your game most of the time. So yeah, it's so
Yeah, and
thankless, I
like
reckon, as well.
it is, and I think it is much more thankful when you're like I am the face of my game in a lot of ways. Like it is my work that I
Yeah.
put up. I don't have a studio name. It's just come under Pat Naoum Games. It is my company. It is me. It's my face on all the like social media posts. And so I also get to interact with people in a much more one-to-one way. So people have a
Mm.
they say, "Oh, I really love this game, man," like blah blah blah, and they will thank me, or they will, you know, they're talking to me, and so I get to talk back to them in that way, um, and that is like a fantastic thing. And your comments, for example, is wonderful. Like I've had people like describe the game in different ways. Like the best one by far was this woman said she played the game with her kids, like from like the
Mm.
ages of like 9 to 13 or something. She said she played the games with the kids and they loved it so much that they put the game down and then started painting and had like a crafternoon. They spent the afternoon
Oh my
crafting,
God,
and
that gave me chills.
I was like, oh, I was like, I've never enjoyed someone not playing my game as much as
Yeah,
that. Like that is fantastic. Like job done,
that is
box ticked. Like that
beautiful.
is extraordinary.
Yeah,
Like that, I love. I love. So it's that kind of thing. It's not just someone necessarily thanking me. It's just being like, oh, I loved it. It did all this. I like, experience. Just explaining what they've experienced is like, it's just fantastic. That's fantastic.
I love that. I love that. Okay, so my final question, I ask
Hmm.
everyone I interview this. Can you please finish this sentence? Behind every great gamer, there is.
Behind every great gamer,
Hmm.
there is a great game, I guess, because gamers are like, if you're having a great experience, or if you're, I don't know, if you're like a elite game like esports player or something, it's about the game that you're playing, because otherwise you're, yeah, if you're having a great experience, it boils down to someone's handcrafted that specific thing that you're experiencing. Like there's an artist behind that putting in like a lot of hours to make sure that, the horse feels magnificent as you're galloping along the, Red Dead Redemption landscapes, or like that the gun feels right in COD. Like, there's just the right kick, there's just the right sound, there's, something feels right, or that the tiny little bird is flapping or gliding in a really nice way in like an indie game or something. I think if you're having a great experience, if you're having a great game is if you're having a great experience as a gamer, then it's the great game behind it for sure.
I love that. So, follow up question to that. Behind every great game developer, what's behind every great game developer? If you've
um,
literally just told me that the game is behind a great gamer, what is behind a great game
behind the
dev?
great game dev.
Because you can't say the
I think
game.
it's.
You've said
I
that for the
think
gamer.
the cop out answer is the great idea, but then I think there's a lot of great games that
Okay.
are great that don't necessarily have a good hook, that are just really great games that are just like,
Ooh.
you know what I
Okay.
mean? So that might not work. I'm thinking it's stubbornness. I think there's an
I
overwhelming
like
sense
that.
of
I like that.
stubbornness to
It's
game
very
dev
human.
because,
It's very human.
right? Because I think there's so much about game dev that is like honestly, like my day-to-day game dev at the moment is like, okay, I'm going to do this task. What are the very micro tasks within this large task? And then I get a micro task, and then I spend several hours building something, having it fail, and then trying to fix it. Like that's game dev as a whole. Like you have to be so stubborn, and then you can do that, and then the game that doesn't work for the game. It might not play right. It might not be fun. Like I spent this whole like process making this thing, and then I played it, and I was like, it's not very fun, is it? No. Okay, I'll try again. Like it's you just there's a certain stubbornness there. I don't know if that's everyone. I'm not a very good dev, so maybe that's just that's just like developer wise coding. I'm terrible. So I'm maybe that's just me just like beating my head against it, and I have a lot of stubbornness. But I think if you're gonna be at least a productive developer, you have to have a certain amount of
Hmm.
stubbornness to you.
I respect that. And stubborn doesn't necessarily have to be negative. So
No, no,
I
I
love
mean
that.
this is
That's
in like
awesome.
grit under your nails, just keep powering through. I think that kind of stubbornness for sure.
Believe in yourself, believe in the idea, and believe that the
Yeah, yeah,
gamer
keep
will love
going.
playing your game. Yeah,
Yes,
I love
yeah.
that.
There'll be someone. If you like the
Awesome.
idea of it, someone else will want to like it as well, for sure.
Absolutely. Well, Pat, that's it from me. Is there anything else you wanted to share?
Um, well, thank you very much. That was a lot of
Of
fun.
course.
I'll plug the game. It is one more time. It's the Master's Pupil. It's a hand-painted puzzle game set inside Claude Monet's eyeball. It is on PC, Mac, on Steam, and you can get it on the Nintendo Switch. And very soon it is coming to PlayStation 5 and Xbox, which I'm super excited about. Um, if you want to follow me on TikTok, Instagram, or Twitter/X, I'm on those three. There's themasterspupil.com, and there's a newsletter there as well. So any information you want to keep up on, there's that. And there's the Discord. Man, there's a lot of things. Okay. But yeah, the Master's
Oh
Pupil.
my God, I'm not
Go
a
and get
part of
it.
the Discord. I have to be added to the Discord.
The Discord's good, and that's something that I wish I could like if I wish I had like five more people that work for me because then we could actually like have a lot more
Mm.
discourse on the Discord. Um, but that's something I want to convert into like part of the next game and get people involved in that through the Discord. So that's one of those watch these spaces kind of thing because I'm really excited about that. There's people that like Discord is something that I've only experienced in the last like I don't know 3 4 years or something. I've kind of got onto it
Mm.
and it's so good. And it's kind of like this like very intimate kind of connection. But again, that's probably another whole story in itself.